He built an empire. He signed 1,000 deals. But on the one day he needed people the most, not a single soul walked through that door. 58 years old, 100 employees on payroll, 0 guests at his door.
He was just supposed to drop off a package. He had no idea he was about to change everything.
He almost turned around, but his daughter looked up and said 4 words that stopped him cold.
Don't worry, Daddy. I'm with you.
No one came for the CEO, but a single dad and his little girl were about to give him something money could never buy.
Happy birthday!
We made this for you.
If you've ever felt invisible on the one day you needed to be seen, this story is for you. And if it moves you even a little, hit that like button and subscribe before we begin, because what happens next will stay with you long after the video ends. Richard Hale had built one of the most respected real estate empires on the East Coast. His name was etched into the lobby directories of 11 office towers. His signature was on contracts worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes, and his face had graced the cover of 3 business magazines. But on the morning of his 58th birthday, Richard Hale woke up alone in a penthouse the size of a small hotel, and the only sound in the apartment was the hum of the air conditioning and the soft whir of the motor in his wheelchair as he maneuvered himself out of bed. 3 years earlier, a car accident on a rain-slicked highway had taken the use of his legs, and in the same violent instant, the life of his wife, Diane. Since then, the empire had kept growing. Deals closed, buildings rose, quarterly reports impressed shareholders. But the man behind it all had quietly begun to disappear. His 2 adult children, Preston and Vanessa, had built their own lives far away, visiting only when there was money to discuss. His old business partners called when they needed a signature. The birthday party his assistant had organized this year, with its gold chairs and 3-tier cake and a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Richard," had 32 RSVPs. 32 people had said yes. Not one of them came. Richard sat by the window that evening, watching the sun bleed orange and pink across the skyline, his reflection ghostly in the glass. His assistant, Carol, had left at 6, apologetically explaining that she had a family dinner to attend. Ironic, given the day. The catering staff had packed up the untouched food an hour ago. The candles on the cake sat unlit in their little cellophane wrapper because there was no one to sing to, and lighting them alone felt like a cruelty he wasn't ready to inflict on himself. He thought about calling Preston. He thought about calling Vanessa. He decided against both because he already knew what the silence on the other end would sound like. 2 floors below, in a battered delivery van with one headlight slightly dimmer than the other, Marcus Reed was finishing his final run of the day. Marcus was 34 years old, a single father who had been raising his daughter Lily alone for the past 2 years, ever since his wife Angela lost her battle with cancer. He worked long hours for a regional courier service, took every overtime shift he could get, and still barely covered rent on their small 2-bedroom apartment across town. Tonight's last delivery was a package addressed to a Mr. R. Hale, penthouse suite, requiring a signature. Marcus almost asked for the shift to be reassigned. He was exhausted, his knees ached from 12 hours on his feet, and Lily's babysitter had already texted twice asking when he'd be home. But something about the address, the top floor of the tallest building on his route, made him curious, and curiosity, along with a stubborn work ethic inherited from his own father, kept him moving forward. He picked Lily up from the babysitter's apartment on the way, since it was on the route and he didn't want her waiting alone any longer than necessary. 7-year-old Lily climbed into the passenger seat of the van with her backpack, still wearing the paper crown she'd made in school that day for Special Helper of the Week. She had also, without telling her father, slipped a card into her backpack, one she'd drawn that morning for no particular reason other than that she liked drawing birthday cakes, complete with a stick figure man in a wheelchair she'd seen in a picture book, candles, and the words "Happy Birthday" to someone, scrawled in crayon because she hadn't known who it was for yet. When they pulled up outside the glass tower, rain had just begun to fall, and Marcus checked the delivery slip twice, unsure if he had the right building. The lobby guard buzzed them up after confirming the delivery, and father and daughter rode the elevator in silence. Faint music drifting through the speaker, the kind of soft instrumental birthday tune played in department stores. Lily hummed along without realizing why. When the elevator doors opened onto the top floor, Marcus stepped into a hallway unlike anything he had ever delivered to before. Marble floors, gold trim, a single door at the end leading into what looked like an entire apartment devoted to one man. He knocked, no answer. He knocked again, and this time heard the faint whir of a motor approaching from inside. The door opened, and Richard Hale looked up at the 2 strangers standing in his doorway. A tired-looking deliveryman in a faded jacket, and beside him, a little girl in a paper crown clutching a crayon-drawn card. Behind them, Richard could see past his own reflection in the hallway mirror, the shape of his birthday banner, and the rows of empty gold chairs, untouched, waiting for guests who never arrived. "Package for a Mr. Hale," Marcus said, holding out his scanner for a signature. Trying not to stare too long at the wheelchair or the vast, empty apartment behind the man, Richard signed. His hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the sheer effort of pretending, for just a moment longer, that this was a normal Tuesday and not his 58th birthday spent entirely alone. But Lily, who had been quietly studying the room over her father's shoulder, tugged on Marcus's sleeve and whispered something. "Daddy, is today his birthday? There's a cake." Marcus glanced past Richard into the apartment, taking in the banner, the untouched cake, the sea of empty chairs stretching across the enormous living room, and something in his chest tightened. He had grown up without much money, but he had never once, not on a single birthday of his life, been alone. His mother had always made sure of that, even in the leanest years. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "is it your birthday today?" Richard's jaw worked for a moment before he answered, his voice quieter than he intended. "It was. No one came." The words hung in the hallway. Marcus looked down at his daughter, who was already stepping forward, holding out her drawing to a man she had known for exactly 11 seconds. "Happy birthday," Lily said simply, offering the crayon card. "I made this at school, but I didn't know who it was for. Now I know." Richard stared at the drawing, a lopsided cake, 7 wobbly candles, a stick figure in a wheelchair with a smile drawn far too big for the tiny circle of a face. He hadn't cried since the funeral 3 years ago, had trained himself out of it through sheer force of will in business meetings and the exhausting performance of being fine. But something about a child's crayon drawing, offered without hesitation or pity, cracked something loose in his chest. "I can't accept," Richard started, but Marcus was already stepping inside, not pushing, just present. "We don't have anywhere we need to be right now," Marcus said. "Do you mind if we stay a few minutes? Nobody should blow out candles alone." What was meant to be a 5-minute signature and delivery stop turned into 2 hours. Marcus found a lighter in the kitchen drawer and lit the 7 decorative candles left over from a smaller cake in the fridge, since the big cake's candles had gone missing in the catering rush. Lily insisted on singing the birthday song twice, once at normal speed and once, at her own request, in opera voice, which made Richard laugh. A real laugh, rusty and surprised, the first one in longer than he could remember. They ate cake at the massive dining table meant for 20, just the 3 of them clustered at one end. Richard learned that Marcus had lost his wife to cancer, that Lily's favorite subject was art, that Marcus worked 6 days a week and still found time to help Lily with her homework every night, no matter how tired he was. Marcus learned that Richard had lost his wife in the same accident that took his mobility, that his children rarely called, that the empire he'd built now felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus stood to leave, apologetic about keeping Lily out so late on a school night. Richard, in a moment that surprised even himself, asked if they might visit again sometime. Not out of pity, but because for 2 hours his apartment had felt like a home instead of a monument to everything he'd lost. Marcus agreed, and true to his word, he and Lily returned the following Sunday, this time not for a delivery, but simply to check in. Richard, in turn, began asking questions about Marcus's work, learning about the physical toll of the job, the unpredictable hours, the way Marcus had been passed over for a dispatcher promotion twice, despite his seniority, because the company favored candidates with a college degree he'd never had the chance to finish. Richard also learned, through careful and gentle questioning, that Lily's school had recently cut its art program due to budget constraints, something that visibly troubled her far more than she let on. Over the following weeks, something unexpected took root. Richard, who had spent 3 years retreating from the world, found himself looking forward to Sunday visits the way he once looked forward to nothing at all. He began using his connections, not out of guilt or grand gesture, but out of genuine care, to help Marcus enroll in an evening logistics management course at a local college, quietly covering the tuition himself and framing it as a company scholarship program so Marcus wouldn't feel like charity. He also made a call to the school board about the art program, and within a month, funding had mysteriously been restored, with an anonymous donor covering supplies for the next 3 years. Marcus, for his part, never once asked Richard for anything. What he gave instead was harder to buy. He showed up. Every Sunday, sometimes Wednesday evenings too, he and Lily would arrive with small, unremarkable gifts, a homemade dinner, a new drawing, stories about Lily's day at school. He talked to Richard not as a wealthy man in a wheelchair to be pitied or courted, but as a person, asking about Diane, letting Richard talk about grief in a way his own children never gave him room to do. Slowly, the empty penthouse began to fill. Not with guests summoned by obligation, but with the quiet, steady presence of 2 people who simply chose to keep coming back. 6 months later, on Richard's 59th birthday, the penthouse looked different. The gold chairs were still there, but this time they weren't empty. Marcus had, without telling Richard, reached out to a few of Richard's old colleagues, and even, carefully, to Preston and Vanessa, explaining gently what had happened the year before. Whether out of guilt, love, or a genuine wish to make things right, both of Richard's children showed up this time, along with a dozen employees who had quietly admired their boss for years, but never felt invited to know him personally. But it was Lily who lit the first candle, climbing onto a chair to reach the towering cake, and it was Marcus who stood beside Richard's wheelchair as the room sang, Off-key and joyful, the same song Lily had once sung in opera voice to a stranger in an empty apartment. Richard looked around the room, not at the crowd, but at the two faces closest to him, and understood, perhaps for the first time since the accident, that family wasn't only the blood you were born into. Sometimes it was a tired delivery driver who refused to let a stranger sit alone on his birthday, and a 7-year-old girl with a paper crown who decided, in the space of 11 seconds, that a lonely man deserved a cake after all. The lesson of that year stayed with everyone who heard it. Kindness costs nothing to give and everything to those who receive it, and sometimes the smallest, most unplanned act, a knock on a door, a crayon drawing, a few extra minutes when you could have simply left, is the very thing that saves a person from disappearing entirely. If this story moved you, remember to like this video, subscribe for more stories like it, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that showing up, even briefly, can change a life forever.